to navigating the transaction. This is being put on a regular basis because we get a lot of questions about how does a transaction happen once we get something going in real estate? Who do we contact? How does the lender fit in? How does the title company fit in? So we do this to help the flow of the transaction. Now, this is mainly made from your perspective as a realtor. We're going to be bouncing in and out of a storyline today to help you understand and walk from A to Z on a transaction of real scenarios that we typically see. So as I said before, if you're fearful of that question of, you know, hey, I'm going to get a house under contract, what the heck do I do now? This is what we need to be talking about. In productivity coaching, we just went over a purchase agreement, which is how we negotiate the transaction and how we actually write that up. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share this contract with, or I'm sorry, this form with anybody online. Kendall, you should have this. Good to go. All right, so in your handout, we have, we're explaining to you exactly how to fill this in. We're going to be going through line by line how to navigate this transaction. So let's go ahead and get started. Grab one of those pamphlets as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first answer is going to be negative 10 days. What are we doing? We are meeting with the buyer and discussing lenders and pre-approval. So the reason why we're bringing this up right off the bat is one of the first things we need to know, and it's not a greedy item from a realtor. You know, a lot of us may feel this way. As soon as we talk with a buyer, we're going, are you pre-approved? Why do some agents not want to ask that question? Why do some agents not want to ask their buyer if they're pre-approved?
Maybe that might just stop, like it's action that they need to do. If they don't do it, you really can't really go forward.
You can't, and a lot of agents are fearful of asking that question on a couple of fronts. Maybe it's one of your good friends, and you know your friend makes $1 bazillion a year, and they go, "Trust me, I'm pre-approved." Right? What is something we should be discussing with them at that time? Yes, you are pre-approved, but we're going to have to negotiate, right? And if we're going to negotiate on your behalf, we definitely have to make sure that the seller knows that you're pre-approved and the seller doesn't know who you are. Often offers happen in the evening time and not all lenders are going to be available. So why don't we go ahead and pass this off to Sean right away and talk about what it looks like. So I'm going to call Sean and say, hey, Sean, I've got a buyer. I'll send him a text and have a meeting with Sean or Chris from Cross Country. And so the buyer's meeting with Sean now. How does that work?
So we all have our scripts and dialogue, but usually what I explain to a buyer is, you know, the different phases. So you're looking to put an offer on a house, your realtor wants you pre-approved, and you know, the pre-approval serves many purposes. It's to tell your realtor, okay, we can start spending our Saturdays together. Okay, Mr. Listing Agent, Mr. Seller, you could take Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. You can, you know, negotiate with confidence, but really, and giving the buyer the peace of mind that they can buy, but really it takes them through the process so they know monthly payments, down payments, loan programs. You'd be surprised how many conversations I'm having at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when offers are due at 5 for someone who hasn't spoken with a bank. Now they're making all these big life decisions at the worst possible time. So having this conversation days or weeks in advance, it's good. So when talking with a buyer, I always say, you know, step 1 is a pre-qualification. Let's look at your income, or tell me your income, tell me what you have in your account, tell me how long you've been at your job. So it's often just verbal, or maybe they're filling out an application online.
In your notes, write down pre-qual is, what are some notes?
Pre-qualification.
Statement of income.
Yeah, pre-qualification, it's informal. So what I always tell people, a pre-qualification, here's what I think we can do based on what you're telling me. They could be lying, they could be dramatically wrong. You'd be surprised with how many people guess what their spouses are making and are nowhere near. Whether it's hourly wage or salary, especially commission and things like that. So pre-qualification, unofficial, I don't say it's meaningless because it's not, but it's really nothing that really carries much weight. So upgrading from a pre-qualification to a pre-approval is saying, okay, send me your pay stubs and W-2s, or we do an employment verification. Send me your bank statements, or we do an asset verification. We pull the credit report doing both of these, so we know pretty much credit-wise we're getting right from the get-go. And the pre-approval gives us the power to print that letter, email that letter. It says, hey, I'm good to go.
Perfect. And how long does that normally take, that conversation with a buyer?
A good pre-qualification, 30 to 45 minutes, because probably the first 10 or 15 minutes is getting information into me, but then me getting information back to them, educating them. Just spoke with a woman this morning, she's under contract, and she qualifies both FHA and conventional. So we had the conversation way back when, that was about 30 minutes. We had the conversation this morning that was about 10. So she knows, you know, the pros and cons between the two of them, the payments between them all. So pre-approval, when someone says how long does that take? I mean, I put them together in 30 to 45 minutes when I have the documents and everything in hand, especially over the weekends, you know, when things need to be put together fast. Sometimes it's a day or days. You got somebody who's self-employed, owns, you know, multiple investment property, or they have some credit issues. There might be a lot more to it.
Time involved.
Pre-approval is good with us. It's 120 days from when the credit report is pulled. So if we pull the credit report on August 1st, that's going to take us to right up to the end of November. Different lenders have different expiration dates, but us, we're at 120.
Perfect. Are you still doing the fast track program?
We're doing the fast track. So this is kind of an upgrade. So the pre-approval, when I issue that standard pre-approval, I have the authorization to issue that. This information is being run through an automated underwriting system with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that's good. That's perfect. That's what most people use. There's an upgraded version called the fast track, where we take all these documents and we actually put it through our full underwriting. So no shortcuts here. If someone says, well, I lost my pay stub from 2 stubs ago, we can't move forward. I'm missing page 6 of my bank statement, we can't move forward. This is a real deal. Every document has to be in, as those are closing on a home in 3 days. So this process, there's no cost to it. A little bit extra paperwork. There's a few signatures that need to be signed, but this is a fully underwritten. So where this comes in handy is if you need to make an offer and want to close in 2 weeks or 10 days, it's already been through underwriting. We still need appraisal and title work and homeowners insurance, but it's a big shortcut and really takes all of the margin for error out of it. And you know, it's a huge selling point. If you're a listing agent, you got 2 offers, a pre-qualification, a pre-approval, and a fast track. A pre-qualification is probably going to be thrown out. The pre-approval and the fast track are going to be looked at, but that fast track it's almost like a cash offer. So that's where it comes in.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to understand the weight of what he just said. He is going to make your buyer pretty much essentially a cash offer at that point. So if you have a buyer that is serious about negotiating, especially in a competitive market, which we still are in, your buyer can close in 2 weeks, potentially sooner, potentially a little bit later, but that is way faster than an FHA buyer that's going 45 days potentially. So that is a huge, huge value. So to your friends or family that are, or clients that are going, you know, should I get pre-approved or do I really need to trust me, or can I make a ton of money? I can get it done. The reason why we're doing this is to make sure those discussions are happening up front. By the way, they may have questions at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night for you about a loan, because they're going, well, I might go up another 10 grand, but I don't know because I don't know what that amount is. This is why, Mr. Buyer, you need to be having these questions right now. So I usually will throw some questions, or, you know, I'm curious if you were to, what rate would you want to be locked in at? And if they can't answer that question, they really don't know the terms of the deal they're about to enter. They need to get educated about that now. That is not our position to educate them on. that is the lender. So it's a great opportunity to do that. I also recommend trying to get an appointment between the two, not just say, hey, give Sean a call. Actually say, hey, Sean, can you meet tomorrow at 2, or can you do a phone call with this buyer, or get a pre-approval going? I try to stay away from pre-quals. Just let them go and jump right into a full-blown pre-approval and then offer them fast track it, especially I'm assuming that's lighting you with like W-2 employees than it is, even though it's probably helpful for self-employed.
I would say it's as valuable because, you get to do someone's tax returns, you open up a whole can of worms in some cases, so we love to tackle that up front.
Yeah, having a quality lender, I'll give you a great example of somebody that we tried to send over to cross country, and they had their bank that they had a long-standing relationship with, which we love to hear that. They had about $20,000 in their bank, and they thought their bank was going to treat them greatly because of this. Sean went ahead and ran the pre-approval. Pretty much at the end of the day, it was the same terms for this buyer. The buyer goes, I have a good relationship. I know the people at this bank. I want to work with them. We just ended up going through nothing but a nightmare and almost lost the deal because it closed 2.5 weeks late. And I've never seen this before from a lender. This lender, I'm not speaking about Sean, this other lender from another bank, who I won't disclose, literally did not respond to about 40 emails between myself, the listing agent, the title company, everyone. They fell off the face of the earth for 3 weeks, and then they came back and said, oh, we're fully approved, we're ready to go. 10 minutes later, they sent us, no, it's a conditionally approved loan. We'll talk about the difference here, and that is a massive difference when we're already a week and a half behind on a deal and nobody's been communicated with. That can literally blow up a deal, and this was the dream home for this buyer. Literally, the dream home he's been waiting for the last 30 years. He finally got under contract and he almost lost it because of a bad lender. So it's important that you have somebody who has a great relationship with your buyers, with your office, who knows how to handle things and communicates well like Sean. So the pre-approval is done. You then hand them back to us. Anything else you want to add during this process?
Two quick things, from the referring, when, let's say Maria, refers a buyer. An email is always nice too, because that customer sees Maria on there and me, and I can reply to everybody. And that customer knows, and the Maria knows that I replied. So there's a little bit of like kind of under the cover accountability there. The other two things, I have 2 customers in that example, Maria and the buyer. I don't want to disappoint one or both. In Eric's situation, that other bank or lender had one customer to disappoint and really doesn't care. They may never work with Eric again, so it's not they lost. That's right. The other part, whether you're a buying agent or a listing agent, when you get a pre-approval, do 2 things. Read the letter, because you'd be surprised what it does and doesn't say, and call the loan officer. When you call the loan officer, if he or she doesn't call you back, well, now you know what to expect moving forward, but ask them questions. Did you collect W-2s and pay stubs? How long is your credit report good for? How long have you been in the business? Oh, 6 months? Okay, things like that, just so, build a little rapport at the very least, but really know what you're getting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's on the listing side. And actually on the buyer side as well, because we may not know this lender that happened, like what my client did, and they had this long-term relationship with this bank. We didn't know what we were walking into. And again, everything's fine until it's not. And that's when the challenges come up. So now they've been pre-approved. So -9 days, I'm going to be doing a buyer presentation. And by the way, when I'm saying -9 days, that's our next fill in there. These are from the day 0 is our contract acceptance date in this example. I'm just giving you a little bit of a heads up of what to expect. So we're doing a buyer presentation. We do full-blown buyer presentations during productivity coaching of how to give a value proposition, why an agent should be working with you, what's all involved with working with you, how to set standards and expectations with your clients. But that's something we go deeper in with our buyer presentation during coaching. Day -8 to day -2 is our next fill-in. -8 to -2. And that is show buyer homes. So -8 to -2 is we're going to be showing a buyer their homes. It usually takes in this market about a week before they're making an offer. The standard can change drastically depending on the buyer you're working with, how big of their criteria. If you've been in business the last 2 years, you'll know that, yeah, they'll make an offer within a week and you're probably gonna still make another 5 offers over the next 2 months. And maybe you'll get one of them accepted in the next 2 months. We are starting to see that slow down, which is a nice thing. A lot of agents are really afraid right now that we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in the market. Trust me, this isn't 2008, at least not yet. We are, maybe it's taking a week and a half to sell a home now. I remember 2 to 3 years ago, agents were bragging that they were getting houses sold in under 60 days. And that was a good thing back then. Like, I'm not making fun of those agents. Like, you had an average market time of under 2 months, like, you were doing pretty well. In the last 2 years, if you had an average market time of more than 7 days, you were doing something wrong. So keep that in mind. Things are still going well, but yeah, during that time, we're showing buyer homes. Something for your notes, if you're a brand new agent, make sure you set up the app showing time. Showing time is where we handle all of our showings. So you go ahead, you log in, and you just type in, I want to show 123 Main Street. You look up the house, and then it'll give you a block of time that you're allowed to see it. It will then automatically contact the owner through a text message. Typically, that owner will then respond back that you are or are not allowed to show it. If you are, it will tell you you're approved and that you're allowed to get into the home. Super easy system to use, and it is amazing compared to what we used to have to do. We would actually have to call an office. The office would then call the seller. The seller then would get it off their answering machine, call them back, so on and so forth. We don't have to deal with that anymore. It's almost instantaneously done. Although I recommend making sure you try, if at all possible, to schedule a showing at least 24 hours ahead of time. Also, for any agents who are newer, make sure you're doing, I recommend no more than 2 showings per hour, and I overlap them at a half an hour, meaning I'll show 2 homes between 2 and 2:30, but I'll block it out from 2 to 3. And then I'll do another 2 homes from 2:30 to 3:30. So I'm always allowing some type of overlap. I usually go by a map direction first, and then the second thing that I'm looking at is vacant homes. I'm putting vacants towards the last. Why do you think I'm putting vacants towards the last?
Because if you're late to go to those, it's okay, because there's no one.
It has to go to the bathroom, seller isn't out of a house in time. You get pulled over, hopefully you don't do that with a buyer. So on and so forth, who knows? It gives you a little bit of extra time. Those vacant homes usually can be pretty good. Although if you are showing vacant homes, please update your showing time. Don't just go in there late. We don't have authorization to go in homes whenever we feel it like it, even if they are vacant homes. Day -1 is making an offer. I did that intentionally because I do get the question, Eric, I'm going to be submitting an offer, in the next week or so, which is very shocking to me. Like, when a buyer wants to make an offer, you need to be making an offer now. Do not wait. I don't care what market you're in. Even if it's the 2008 market, there are homes that are still selling, and it's the best homes that are selling, and usually your buyer wants the best home. So if you fall out and wait too long for that house to go under contract, it's going to be an issue. So make those offers immediately, have urgency. During negotiating, the first thing I'm doing is calling that agent and seeing what type of activity they are receiving. So I'm saying, hey, Mr. I drive out the driveway. My buyer said, Eric, I love the house. Let's go ahead and set up an offer. I say, great. Let me talk to the owner before I give you a purchase price. Don't wing it. The first item that I'm giving the most value in negotiating is going to be, what's the seller doing with the home? Are they selling it just because they feel like it? Are they selling it because they got a job transfer? Are they selling it because they're underwater on the house, or they can't afford the monthly payment anymore, or whatever it might be? I'm asking what the motivation of the seller is. Secondly, I'm asking what type of activity. Now, that listing agent, if they're a good listing agent, should just be telling you, I'm sorry, I don't have the authority to tell you, or they should be saying, I've had permission from my seller, and we've had 20 offers. Those are the only 2 real responses, in my opinion, that you should be giving. Because if you're saying like, oh, my seller said I can give you activity or an activity report, we haven't had a showing in 2 weeks. What is your buyer going to do with that information? That's exactly it. So if you're a good listing agent, you don't say that. So maybe you do tell that agent though in a different market, let's say the market does drastically slow down, it might be wise to get permission from the seller to say, yeah, my seller is very motivated, we would like to see an offer. So don't be intimidated to send over an offer. But I wouldn't say that house has been vacant and it's been a terrible listing or anything like that. That's a licensing violation because your fiduciary duty is to do what's in the best interest of your client. So be aware of that. But yeah, I'm feeling out the agent, I'm writing up the offer, and we start negotiating. Negotiating typically takes less than 24 hours. If you're taking more than 24 hours on your side, it's a problem. Another question I normally get is my buyer made an offer and we haven't heard anything from the seller. Very common on a brand new listing, by the way, because a lot of sellers go, I want to wait and see what happens with more offers. That's a whole other conversation. On the listing side, I don't recommend on just waiting a week to accept an offer because buyers' motivations are at the very highest when they're walking out of that house and they've determined that they want to make an offer. From that point on, every day they are losing like 5 to 10% of motivation. If you wait 3 or 4 days, it's beyond their mind. They've gone to sleep 3 or 4 different days dreaming of this house and they're excited. And every day they're losing more and more hope. So the most likely opportunity to get the best offer for your client is immediately when it comes over or within 24 hours. But be in communication with the other agent, let them know the strengths of your offer. You should be communicating with the lender. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we're negotiating here. Now, day 0 to day -1, we are going to be negotiating the following items. Number 1 is the condition of the property. Potentially, you're going to be negotiating, hey, we saw that the house needs a new roof. We're going to be asking for a new roof. If you are doing that, you need to be communicating with the lender because there's correct ways to do it and incorrect ways to do it. Every lender is going to have a little bit different of a take. Make sure you're doing that correctly. You're going to be negotiating price, obviously. Earnest money. Does higher earnest money or lower earnest money look better for the seller?
Higher.
Why?
Strength of buyer.
It's more attractive.
Absolutely, it locks a buyer in. And the biggest question I get from a buyer is, well, Eric, if I don't get the deal, do I get the? Now, who gets the earnest money?
Title company usually.
The lucky girl in our left corner here. She gets all the earnest money. Jade gets it all. She puts it in her pocket. She holds it at the title company in a non-interest bearing account. Now, Jade, if I come to you and I say, look, on the contract, Jade, it says I get the earnest money back if I don't like the deal, do you just give it back to me with the contract?
No.
Doesn't matter what the contract states. This is the only time. Yeah, that's what every buyer tells me to. But I explain this now during negotiations to a buyer. Jade, what do you need?
We need what's called a mutual release.
From both the.
An
Correct.
executed
Yeah.
mutual release.
Fully executed.
Let me say that, signed by both the buyer and the seller.
Yes, very important. That's the only way the buyer can get the earnest money back. So typically, Jade, who gets the earnest money back?
Typically the buyer, or yeah, the buyer will get the earnest
Almost always the buyer gets the earnest money back, and that's what's significant with lower amounts of money. If it's $1,000 to $3,000, sellers are going, I don't care about it. I want my $150,000, $250,000. Get them out of here and let's move on. It's important that we understand, tell our buyers though, and here's why it doesn't matter what the contract states. It states that the buyer can get the earnest money back if there is something that was not previously disclosed on the property disclosure that is now found during the home inspection. So for instance, let's say the seller said there is a wall that is damp in the basement, right? And we go in there and that wall is damp. Well, maybe you thought when you walked through the house first that it was just a minor amount of dampness. Well, what is dampness? Is that just a wall that has a high humidity level, or is that, actual drips coming off the wall? Is that a puddle on the ground? It's not for the title company to make that determination. It is for the buyer, seller. If it does not get determined by the buyer or seller, who does decide that? A court. That's simply it. That is not the job of the title company. So it's important that you explain that to the buyer. Whatever earnest money amount they're putting in, they have to be willing to risk that if the seller refuses to release it, that they will be willing to take it to court if that had to happen. I can tell you it is extremely rare that I've never had a deal go to court over earnest money. It can happen, but it depends on how you're negotiating and the expectations you're setting.
I read somewhere that earnest money could be held up to 2 years. Is that
Correct.
true?
Correct. After 2 years, I don't know the specific language. Andrew Ginter would be able to answer this a little bit better. He's our broker. But I'm pretty sure after 2 years, if nobody's made claim against the earnest money in court, that it goes back to the buyer. Yeah, I would be very cautious, and I don't even tell a buyer that. I just tell them it is going to be held until we end up either getting a mutual release signed, and we're dealing with a crazy person on the other side. Let's say we find out the whole house is on a radioactive plant or something like that, and it wasn't disclosed, and the seller goes, I don't care, I don't want to release you from the contract. Jade cannot release that title, that earnest money, neither can any other person out there. You have to get a court to enforce it. So again, I'm giving crazy scenarios that rarely, if ever, happen, but it's important that your buyer understands that they're not breathing down your neck going, why do I thought I was getting my earnest money back? It says it in the contract. And by the way, to go back at that quote, it does matter what the contract states. It's not our job to enforce it. It's the court's job to enforce it, to clarify that. Another item is seller credit for, you can write this down, closing costs, points, and or prepaids. That's the exact term you use. You don't just say seller to pay closing costs or something like that. Seller to pay X amount of dollars towards closing costs, points, and or prepaids is the term we use. Sean, we have not seen much of that going on. Are you seeing any more in the last 30 days?
A little bit more, yeah, we're seeing like more FHA offers get considered and accepted, and seller credit seems to sneak in a little bit more, not a ton, not nearly as much as normal.
Why do you think that in the last 2 years, we have not seen very much seller paid closing costs?
In the seller's market.
The sellers is in control of the market.
You are correct on that. Go a little bit deeper. Why does it make a difference? Because if, let's say a buyer or a seller gets two offers, one is $100,000 with $5,000 back. And another offer is $94,000. Which offer nets the seller more money? The higher offer, right? The 95 essentially. Why would a seller still go with the $94,000 offer? Because the appraisal has to hit 100,000. And in an appreciating market, we've had a very big challenge with appraisers for whatever reason magically hit 95,000 in that number when they're just saying a seller, a buyer is just offering their money and closing costs. And if we're back to square one with that buyer and saying we're renegotiating the deal or we're falling apart and going to, deal number two. Another item we're going to be negotiating is title company. Making sure you have a good title company is going to be important. Somebody who's responsive, somebody who shows up, somebody who actually can handle the transaction is going to be very, very important. Title companies, I feel like, are, if they're doing their job correctly, you never hear about them. Would you agree with that, Jay?
Oh, yeah.
When they're not doing their job, there's a notorious title
It'll
company.
stand on
another
its
broker.
street corner and yell it to anybody who will listen.
That's exactly it. So you do need somebody that's handling that. We'll talk to Jade a little bit more here about that. Here's another big item, and this has to be in every deal that has this. It is not the job of the title company to negotiate this, yet a lot of people think it is. The point of sale, who is responsible for it? Where is the money coming from, and who does it go to once the point of sale is done? We dive deeper into this in productivity coaching. We can do a whole session on a point of sale. We're not going to dive that deep into it today. Septic, which we are seeing go a little bit by the wayside because they've loosened up regulations in Geauga County specifically, which has been the problem child over the last 20 years. They just released a new direction with that program, which is not as big of a challenge. H is home warranty. We're going to talk a little bit about home warranty today and how home warranties work. That can be negotiated against the buyer or the seller. We have seen drastic drop in home warranties as well over the last 2 years because sellers were in the driver's seat and buyers were just saying, we'll take it however we can take it. Pre-close seller occupancy and post-close seller occupancy. We have commission in here. That is a negotiable term. I always say I can negotiate my commission. It can be 7%, 8%, or 9%. You choose what you'd like. It's an old real estate joke. If you want to charge that, you can. But the point being, we have that in here. It's not something that I encourage you to do. And very often I watch a lot of agents. You can write this down. In the absence of value, price is the only consideration. In the absence of value, price is the only consideration. Meaning if you're a real estate agent and you're not giving any value to your clients, yes, price is the only thing you can negotiate. If you're there to help and guide them and show them the values of the property and show them how you're going to navigate the transaction, show them how you have the resources, title company, escrow, lending, home warranty companies, you have the ability to help them, that's going to protect your commission, and it's rightfully so. We're needing more than ever in this market. All right, next one, day 0, contracts accepted. You can put a little exclamation point or heart or whatever you want to do to celebrate that moment, because that's an exciting moment. You should also make note, this is the highest your buyer is going to feel during the transaction until they get keys. They are the most excited at this moment, and be ready for that to drop down drastically in a moment. So they're very happy right now. They're excited. You're all high-fiving. It's also important that your client will sign practically anything you put in dot loop in front of them right now. That sounds great. That is not a great thing if they don't understand it. We talk about during the purchase agreement session, we go through paragraph by paragraph, not sentence by sentence, but explain what they are signing, because they will sign any purchase agreement. Hand signing they won't do. They used to hand sign them and they would literally read everything. It's important that your client understands what they're signing. So make sure they're understanding when they write down earnest money, when that is due and how much it is. When your seller signs something and an offer comes over, make sure you're telling them that you have to fix the house for the point of sale, or you have to be out of the house on a certain date. So I had a client years ago, and I always look to myself what I could have changed. I don't know what else I could have changed. I told him possession was on the 30th, and it was like a week before, and he said, well, when do I give? It was a week before, and he's like, well, when should I start moving? And I said, well, you just told me you understood possession was the 30th. What did you think? He goes, well, yeah, but it goes, when do I give keys? And I'm like, break it down as best you can, and give reminders throughout the transaction. So we think things are easy, but again, buyers are getting all of this education and things are happening they don't understand. So make sure you're repeating yourself and you're going through on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis of what next to expect. Yeah, make sure that they're taking notes as well, because all they hear right now is, I got a house, I'm so excited. So be aware to put them behind it. Now, a couple of other notes you can put on the side here. There are really 2 major items, possibly 3, that could hiccup the transaction. Who knows what those 2 or 3 items are? What's that? Liens. Those definitely can. That's not a typical challenge. Good
Something
answer.
happens in their finances, a job
Yeah.
reduction, job loss, or some major life situation happens.
Maybe they bought a fancy car or something like that was in their control. Make sure you're telling them not to do things like that, or pull credit cards, or go buy furniture yet. The big items, number 1 is going to be the home inspection. The home inspection can put a hiccup on the buyer or the seller side. 2, making sure that they can get through financing. What's the biggest hiccup typically in financing that's out of all of our control?
The appraisal?
The appraisal. Making sure the appraisal hits not only the right number, but also the right condition. You can usually tell if the house is going to have a condition problem or not, but we don't know until that's done. We'll talk a little bit more about that. 3rd is going to be the point of sale repairs. And the reason we're going to be talking about this, and it's important to tell your sellers, I know you're excited about the home. There are 3 main items that we don't know. You might continue to get beat up during this transaction. First thing happens, home inspection happens, all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, what do you mean I need to fix $5 grand worth of work? They get hit with that. All of a sudden, a week later, what comes in? The appraisal. Not only does the appraisal come in low, the appraisal comes in with more repairs. Mr. Seller, guess what? You're doing more repairs and you're reducing the price. Number 3, the point of sale now comes. They have another 3 repairs that they want you to do. We don't see this as often as we used to, but I'm telling you, it is a real scenario. And if you don't prep your seller, they feel like you're doing nothing but beating them up with boxing gloves. So make sure you're telling them up front, I'm going to beat you up with boxing gloves. So you get my point that we're not done until we're past these 3 items. And even then, we still can have some hiccups, but that's going to get you 90% of the way. Once I cross off those 3 boxes, I'm going, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. And it's just important, I say, we're partially celebrating right now. We're, 20% into this, getting the house sold, where they feel like they're, oh, it's sold, it's done. Nope, not yet. Celebrate, high five, but let's keep moving forward here. All right, any questions thus far?
Do you have a list of what cities have on the sale?
So Jade does have that.
Speech.
Is that on your website?
I will email it to you
Okay.
and, or if you want, you can give me a list of everybody on here and I will email them, whatever works best for you,
Perfect.
but it is on my computer. It's an electronic copy, living, breathing document, because when the sales change, like,
I
with the weather.
Yeah, they do. I just had one with Euclid, because months ago, I would say last year, they was just doing outside. But now they're doing inside out. I just had one done the other day.
So they are only doing exterior.
Yeah,
Now, there's a box that they check on Euclid specifically that the seller can't, it just says interior inspection. Yes, it doesn't say no.
okay,
So when a seller reads that, what do?
Check.
They check a box. That gives them authorization to go inside. If your seller, or if you prep your seller, don't check that
that
box.
okay.
They do the exterior only. The reason is that
Alright.
that's an invasion of privacy problem. Some
Got
cities,
sued for that years, a couple years
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Not on the property. One of the councilmen told me that they got sued for that, so they no longer require inside to be.
because it was an invasion of privacy, yeah, so they can only enforce exterior.
And sometimes too, it may not be an owner, like the sellers might not be the owner, they may be the landlord, and they
Yeah.
might be tenants, and that might really
Oh, yeah,
open up an invasion of privacy to a tenant.
absolutely, absolutely. So that's something that can go really deep, and as Jade said, even if you have these lists, they're a great general idea. I encourage you during our Magic 6, we're gonna talk about that, which are your 6 immediate items once you go under contract, you always call that city and ask them what's it going to take to get what they call typically an occupancy permit or a transfer, authorization to transfer, whatever they call it, saying, is there anything we need to do to take care of your point of sale? So,
That's another point too, because just because there's point of sale, some of the cities require the buyer then to go after the point of sale is completed to get an occupancy permit before they can do title transfer.
I actually outlined one time, I wanna say one of the cities had 10 steps to get an authorization to transfer. And if you ask the agent, they would say, point of sale is done. If you ask the seller, they go, I already filed the forms. If you
Yeah.
ask the buyer, they're like, yeah, it's taken care of. But the problem is, the city's going, no, the last 3 items haven't been done. So be very, very careful of relying on anyone else but the city or a certificate from the city with a correct date, which we're gonna talk about next here. So the Magic 6, this is going to be day 0 to day 1. So the contract's accepted, you high five to your seller, and now it's time for you to get to work immediately. Like I say day 0 to day 1, we intend to do this like 6 o'clock at night, I'm starting on it. If I get a text, I'm blowing these texts out real quick about these 6 items. And I also tell my buyer, these are the next 6 items that you're going to be working with myself and my assistant Taylor. For you, if you don't have an assistant, you're just saying, these are the next 6 items we're doing in the next 24 hours. Number 1 is going to be review the entire contract, and we use a buyer and seller checklist that's in your .loop or DocuSign. Fill all those forms out. We don't need to be waiting on a home warranty waiver to be signed by your client because it got skipped during this process and now you close and now your client's going, do you have we have a home warranty? Why wasn't this disclosed to me before? I want to get one, or my furnace just broke down, so on and so forth. Get these signed now. Your clients will sign them. When you wait until Carrie, Julia are emailing you and saying, hey, we're looking for these last forms, where are they at? And you're trying to get paid and now you're reaching out to your seller, it's a mess. So we want to do this right now. Send contract and escrow letter to the title company. One other piece of information that I want you all to write in Send your buyer's contact or your client's contact information along with that. Jade will appreciate that greatly. Make sure they have your
Yes.
client's contact info.
Both sides too.
Yeah.
If you look at it, make sure we have it in some way or form.
Because Jade and GM Title is going to be sending out information to your clients. Keep in mind, this is not on here, but they're gonna be asked to fill out I review two things with my buyers at this point. Number one, a pre-closing document. Jade, can you tell us what a pre-closing document is?
So you mean the pre-closing forms?
Jade, why don't you come up here and we'll let you do your,
Are you
session.
talking about the pre-closing forms that we send out?
yes, yeah, the
Okay.
pre-closing docs, and then we'll talk about the insurance.
Okay, so for every deal that you guys complete, when you guys send us a contract, once we enter it, order it in our system, they will automatically, buyers and sellers will get something called pre-closing forms. These are how we process our file. So we'll have certain information on there for the seller. It will be if they have a mortgage on the property. What's the loan number? What's the social security number? Usually with all mortgage companies, you cannot order a payoff without those two things. A lot of times though, if you're the listing agent and you have sellers, we do get a lot of pushback for some reason on providing a social security number. Just let them know, they're not buying something off of Amazon. They're buying and selling one of the biggest investments in their life. So we need that purpose for payoffs, if there's any liens, so, we'll get into that once the search, but if there are any weird liens on the property, we usually need a social security number to clear those liens. Any HOA information, if they're married or not, because Ohio is a dower state, so their spouse will have to sign off on the deed. Just a lot of important information that they don't know what goes on behind how we close a deal. So pretty much just personal information that is prevalent to the property.
Now, keep in mind, it's not going to be Jade at GM Title reaching out to your client typically. And if you don't prep them that they're going to be reached out to, again, they're high-fiving, they're excited about the house, and then all of a sudden some random person calls asking for their social security number, of course they're going to have pushback. I would as well. It's our job to prep them and say, hey, there's going to be some personal information coming from GM Title. It is okay for you to fill out, and that's necessary while you buy or sell a home. The second item that we always get the question about is,
Yeah.
yes. So,
In those forms, they will get an offer for a closing protection coverage. What that is
What is that called?
CPL, closing protection coverage letter. That's what it's with the L. But all buyers and sellers will have an option to choose this. What it does is it protects them against any fraudulent activity that goes on with the money once it reaches our account. I will go on to explain what it comes from because right now it just sounds kind of shady. But it stems from the recession in 2008. What was happening was a lot of title companies had money in escrow for point of sale repairs, holds that we were doing, escrow funds, escrow money, they were in the title company's account. Then after the recession, title companies were closing down left and right, and they had those funds still in their account. And I think a lot of bad things happen to a lot of people because now it's law that we have to offer this, and that is what it protects them against. It is completely optional though. They do not have to get it, so let them know that. And if they have any questions in that initial email that we sent out, we do clip a video from the IRS as to why, or Ohio, whoever made the law, as to why it is the way it is and what it protects them against. So if there's any questions, direct them to that video.
is there any difference between closing protection coverage and title insurance?
Yes, the coverage really deals with the funds. The closing protection does, and title insurance covers your clients for any unclaimed liens that were on the property. Mistakes happen. So let's say someone were to put a lien against your property, you sold it and a title company or someone came after an heir to the property was like, I never got my money from the sale of this property, I want it now. That's what title insurance is for, is to protect you from anyone coming after your client's biggest asset.
Now, the title company also is getting hit from multiple different directions. It's important that you understand this and you prep your clients for it as well. How many checks do you cut out per transaction, would you say?
I would say about 20.
20 different people that not only are they paying, they're calculating what they are to be paying to those individuals, and they're communicating that not only to your buyer, but to the lender, to the city, to the
Home warranties.
home warranty.
Any taxes, if it's tax season, to the lender, to, we paid off home insurance, I mean, the list goes on and on. If there's any attorneys in there, the attorneys will stick their invoice for estates, LLCs, things of that nature.
So there could be multiple different people working on your transaction, and just be aware, it's important that you get your eyes on what's called the closing disclosure or the Alta statement, because you should be able to see on there. I had a call from one of my clients that had a deal that closed that was not with GM Title, and they panicked. They said, Eric, you said I was going to net 20 grand. I'm netting negative 3,000. What is happening? Now that's a massive panic item, moment for my client. And we asked the title company to please send us the Alta. We always want to review them before our clients get them, because this happens. What they did was they added up, they put one escrow agent put 18 grand in for the septic on one line, and then they added it again on another line completely separate. Our clients don't understand how to look at these. We do. So we have to be looking at them and reading and going, what is on there that's correct, what's not on there. Again, there are checks flying around all over the place. We have to make sure our eyes are on it as well for another verification. So be aware of that. Anything else you would want to add?
No, but I think that's a great point. Double check our math again. These are people who are performing these. It's not a computer. They could be wrong. They could have read something wrong. Something could have been unclear. So it's always a good idea. Double check the math. Double check what's on there, especially if you know there's a credit on there or something that is kind of different. Make sure to see it's there, because people do make mistakes, not just GM Title, all title companies. I've seen it a million times.
All title companies, and don't forget too, this mistake could be on you as well. Maybe you signed a removal of contingency saying that there's a $5,000 credit going back to the buyer, and you gave it to the lender, and the lender never updated it. You never updated the title company. The title company did their job, and they're now the ones that look bad because nothing was ever sent to them. So a couple of quick hitters that I always check. Number one is earnest money. Number two is tax prorations. Number three is going to be any repairs and, or I should say, closing cost credit. Commission. Always check your commission. Admin fee as well. Purchase price. It's an easy one.
Especially if there's a change.
Yeah. I think those are the big items we can hit there. All right, Jade is the rep for GM Title. If you have any questions, she can help you with
Yes,
putting together
absolutely.
net sheets as well. They have a net sheet form on their or net sheet ability on their website. I recommend, if you have not done one before, have Jade run one with you, and Jade would be happy to jump into that. And that way, when your seller goes, Eric, how much money am I netting? Of course, my neighbor sold for 220. I want 225. They don't know what they're going to net at the end of the day. And it's important that you are hitting that number on the head. It's pretty simple to do, yet your first one might be a little bit confusing. So it's important to reach out to Jade, she'll help you out. Of course. Very good. Thank you so much, Jade. All right, next item is confirming earnest money and receipt. So we simply reach out to the title company by email. And Jade, your contact info is on here as well, right?
Yes, it is on the 17th. That sheet.
Put that in your phone so you have it. Like literally just put it in your phone. So we email the title company and just ask them, have you received the earnest money deposit? We're going to talk about how to actually submit that here in a little bit. Just like my notes here. So yeah, we confirm earnest money and receipt. This does not mean confirmation means you text your buyer and your buyer goes, yep, sent it in. That is not confirmed. You need to make sure that the title company has received it. Maybe they did mail it in and it got lost in the mail. Please don't mail earnest money.
Yeah.
Please don't say,
Do not.
let me touch on that. Do not email or mail earnest money right now. If you guys need me to pick it up, I do not mind going to either office to do that.
Yeah, Jade comes in constantly, so just put it on the front desk. Even better, go on their website. They have an ACH. It's the best thing ever. Just send it to your buyer, say, go deposit it. It's it's completely free, right?
Yes,
Completely free to do. If they want to go to their bank, they'll wire it, spend $20. They're,
Yeah.
like Jade said, they're not buying something off Amazon. They're buying hundreds of thousands of dollars of real estate. Usually you can spend $20 and go wire the money if you need to. So even just collecting it in person is a challenge as well. It's just easier ACH or wire. Checks aren't bouncing, none of that happens. So, all right, send contract to Sean Hadley or the lender. Cross country. Anything you want on your side as far as the purchase agreement goes?
We want everything, every disclosure, every document, every addendum, because if you go to page 6 or 7, and it has those little boxes checked, ABA form, FHA, whatever's checked there is part of the contract, so we have to have all of that. Property disclosure. I usually suggest 2 extra things, if applicable, an HOA, if it's a condo, or even if it's just like a neighborhood development, the contact for that HOA, and make it easy, just a copy of the MLS sheets. Any lender would love that, because we can't always read, especially if it's a team, we don't know who the real contact is on the contract, or if they hand wrote it, can't scribble that, there's always typos. So the MLS sheet would be handy too.
Perfect,
I'd say same with title, those exact.
perfect. Now, keep in mind, anything you send to the lender, be very careful of like how your sellers are filling out disclosures. They have to fill them out accurately and correctly, but don't over disclose or take guesses. For instance, if your buyer says like, water in the basement, that lender is going to go, what do you mean water in the basement? I go, well, I spilled a gallon of water yesterday, or a fish tank is leaking. Like, that is completely separate than water in the basement. I'm giving you a crazy example here. But the bank is going to require somebody to come out and inspect this, an engineer, or have a repair done. Like, make sure that your clients are properly filling out contracts. If there is a reduction after the home inspection for what's called a removal of contingency, if sellers want all the time, they go, well, I want to say that I'm reducing the price by $5,000 because of these 5 items. Well, if there's mold in the attic, which every house in the state of Ohio states under disclosure, every house has mold, some is harmful, some is not. If it states on there, seller to reduce purchase price by $5,000 for mold, well, guess what? That house isn't closing, because the lender is not going to give a loan on it until that repair is done and certified, or there's some type of inspector that comes out and actually inspects it, verifies the air quality test. So all I'm saying is, if you're doing a price adjustment, just do the price adjustment. You don't have to line item what the repairs are. Now, if there are repairs, you do have to do what we do during the purchase agreement. Who is doing it? When is it going to be done by? Who's going to pay for it? When's it being paid for? All of those items have to be determined. Next item is going to be schedule all inspections. Make sure you put all and underline all inspections. If you're getting a mold inspection, don't wait till day 7 to try and figure it out in 24 hours. Do it right up front. We are scheduling these immediately. The faster you can get through inspections and appraisals, the faster and less stressful everyone is. More likely your buyer is going to get the earnest money back too. That should be like when they ask that question. If you do things quickly, call your home inspector before we're even under contract. If it looks like we're likely to do so, check the availability of the home inspector and see if they can get out there tomorrow. If you only waste 24 hours or 48 hours of the seller's market time, they may not even change it in the MLS. There was no harm done to them. You're likely to get that earnest money back. If you wait 3 weeks to do a home inspection and you're out of contract and you're negotiating and getting roofers to check on prices, and you're going to check more prices before you make the next move, your seller's going to be very upset and want that earnest money. I just had last week my first seller ever to get the entire earnest money voluntarily from the buyer. It's very unique, very rare item. But last one is city point of sale. Immediately, now if it's my listing, I've already done this. First contact with my seller, I'm having them line this up. Now, if it's my buyer, I just got started now. So with a buyer, I'm going to be checking with with that city at that moment. I'm calling the city and saying, where do we currently stand? I'm not reading what's in the MLS that the seller applied for it or something like that. I'm calling the city always, because I want to know from the city what is actually happening, unless I have a certificate. If I have a certificate, I check the date, we're good.
Would you say the schedule?
Schedule all inspections. All right, day 1 through 40, we check on the Magic 6 daily. I cannot tell you how important it is. A lot of agents have had trouble over the years with like, I did the Magic 6, and it's like, well, what'd you do? I'm like, I checked the title company if their money's in. I'm like, well, it was day 0 or day 1. Of course, like you have to follow up and see if they actually got it. So we check that daily until that check mark is checked. Yes, title company got earnest money. I don't have to check on it. Lender applied for their loan, or buyer applied for their loan with the lender, verified, check, done, move on. But you might have to check on this multiple times. This is what's going to be very, very helpful. Always ask yourself, what else can I do in this transaction? Once we get through the Magic 6, often Taylor and I discuss it every morning, and we go, all right, we're all set. And then we go, if there was something we could do on this transaction, what would it be? And sometimes it's a simple phone call. We want at least 1 phone call per week to that client saying, here's where we're at, here's what to expect next. Everything's smooth sailing. You're not going to get any phone calls for the next week. Title's cleared, lender's cleared. You're going to get a phone call from title in a week. So just hang tight. It's going to be quiet. I have in here, it's better to be proactive than reactive. While Taylor and I are going through that in the morning, Taylor's my assistant, if you don't know her, we are sending out emails to our clients and or title and or lender and just shooting a quick email instead of having them make 5 phone calls and you're bouncing around between phone calls with your clients. Like just shoot a quick email to them and say, hey, here are the next steps, or hey, did you get the earnest money in? Or hey, whatever it is. That also documents you to protect you, because if you're emailing your client every day going, did you get the earnest money? Did you get the earnest money? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? You are doing your job. And you have to communicate that to the correct parties at the right time. For instance, if your client doesn't hand that in, that's a problem. So day 1 through day 3, we are going to apply for a loan. So Sean, why don't you come back up? Sean's now back in the hot seat, and it's his job now to get the loan going, and we're going to help him along with that. So Sean, how does that work?
Okay, so let's say today's Wednesday. Let's say we did a pre-approval last week. You took your buyer out this weekend, put an offer on house Monday, gets accepted Tuesday. You send me the contract Tuesday evening, or the buyer reaches out, and here we are on Wednesday making make a call. Call the buyer and say, camera there. Congrats on your offer, and a little bit of combination. And oftentimes I'll say, oh, and good job, Maria. Glad you picked Maria because no one else can seem to get under contract. So there's always a little back and forth, little positive reinforcement there. But so the way the conversation goes with the buyer. Now, let's assume that I've spoke with this buyer before we did a pre-approval. The conversation seems somewhat seamless. Oftentimes, I've already spoken with the buyer about this particular house because I encourage that dialogue to happen before the offer is made. But say, hey, congrats, based on the conversations we had, we were talking about an FHA loan. Let's just recap the price, the taxes, get everything in. Okay, today's rate is such and such percent. Let's recap everything. Here's the monthly payment. Again, should be no surprise. Here's the closing cost. We go through all of that. And this conversation is usually, even though this is the most important part of the step process, this conversation is usually just short because we've talked about it all at the beginning. But the buyer says, yep, I'd like to go ahead and move forward. We typically lock in the interest rate. The buyer has that option. We send mortgage documents electronically unless they want to come in, or of course we could overnight, but prefer not to do that. So they can e-sign all the documents. So today's Wednesday, lock someone's right here this morning. Probably tomorrow or Friday, my assistant Carmen or Chris, whose transaction we're working on, will send the mortgage documents out. The mortgage documents, it's a little intimidating. It's, in total, depending on the loan type, 25 to 30 different documents. Most of those are very generic. We have 3 different disclosures that just talk about homeowners insurance. But there's a few that are very specific to the rate, the program, the monthly payment. And I prep them before this ever comes out. After it's out, we give them a day typically to have it arrive. Oftentimes it's in the evening. We do a follow-up call. Oftentimes they've already signed it, or we need to walk them through documents, or they may just be waiting for their spouse to review it. Once those documents are signed, we then are able to move the file to process. Now, in this stage, if we don't already have current W-2s, pay stubs, bank statements, or what we have is outdated, we're going to get them at this point. Also, now that the application is signed, we can order the appraisal. This is the one and only time that we, the lender, are gonna ask for a payment. It's put on a credit card, it's for the cost of the appraisal. Cost of the appraisal depends on the loan type, if it's a 40-unit home, a 1-unit home, an investment property. Single family home, you're typically looking $550, maybe up to $600. If it's a multifamily or a single family home or $1 million property, the cost will be a few $100 more. The appraisal, the buyer doesn't go to that, the buying agent doesn't go to that. Usually it's either the seller or the listing agent, or they just give them the code and say, hey, go on it. I encourage listing agents to go to the property and meet the appraiser. It's your one and only chance to have any kind of a conversation with the appraiser. I don't get to talk to the appraiser. There's a wall put up between myself and appraisers because of things from the past, as though I would intimidate an appraiser into giving value. And you're looking at my size here. Yeah. But there's so really, that's really time to get a conversation. Guide them around the house, let them know what improvements were made. They're not really supposed to take a list of comps, but general conversation can be had. While that appraisal is being done, we're already processing the file. Behind the scenes, we're doing employment verifications, asset verifications, ordering the title work, ordering any credit updates that are necessary. The file then goes to the underwriter. Underwriter reviews the file and says, hey, this file looks good. It's approved subject to these conditions. I need the appraisal, proof that the gift money has been deposited, homeowner's insurance, title work, etc. Once all those items are in, goes back to the underwriter, comes out clear to close. CTC. You see that acronym? It's not time to celebrate, but we're getting. That means the lender is basically done with their work. We've passed the baton over the title work to say, hey, Jade, we're good to go. Get the buyer's schedule. So they'll call the buyer's schedule. Now, Jade her team may have their own work to do. They may be still chasing HOAs. They may be waiting for the seller to sign some paperwork to get the payoff. But our work is in effect done until that appointment is scheduled. So statistically speaking, right now, from the time someone applies for a mortgage, not under contract, but applies for a mortgage to closing, averages about 52 days, which boggles my mind. Northeastern Ohio probably averages about 42 days. We did $50 billion in loans as a company, not my team, but the company as a whole, we averaged 26 days. We routinely close in 21 days. I have 4 loans right now that aren't closing until September. We're already clear to close. So we can move as fast or faster than anybody is what I would say. But these are questions to ask your lender. It's not with myself, for example. How long do you need? Need special circumstances? Oh, we need 45 days. Okay, good. As long as you know that before the contract is written, you can set the expectation. So going back to when we have it scheduled, Jade's company said, or title company says, hey, we're signing on September 1st to close September 2nd. That finally we get to send and push the documents, and we call them the instructions to the title company. They balance the final closing disclosure, send it to us, a little back and forth, say, yep, we agree, we're both on the same page. Title company contacts the buyer to tell them, hey, here's exactly how much you need. And sets the wire instructions. Typically it's going to be a wire for the closing funds. That's what's done.
Couple of quick items for everyone. When I know Sean just talked about how he's got the clear to close in September for deals closing in September, and some of you might go, well, what's the difference? Like, it's September, why is that of value to my client? Really think about what I just went through on that other deal. I want you to think you have a buyer that's trying to file on their property today. They have moving trucks lined up. They are all set to go. And you still are hearing from the lender that they're waiting on something. They haven't gotten it back through underwriting. The stress that puts on your client that they could potentially lose the deal or have to move around moving trucks, it completely kills the enthusiasm that they can have. It puts them through stress, and it could lose them the house and or the financing if they have a lender who is incompetent or doesn't know how to handle the transaction. So it is essential that when you hear that you can get clear to close 2 weeks ahead of time, that makes things beautiful for your buyer. You need to have a lender that's doing what they should be. 3 other notes you should be taking right now. There are 3 things your buyer has to pay for that it's all over buyer. Number 1 is their earnest money. Number 2, what did Sean just talk about? Only time he's asking for
Appraisal.
paying for the appraisal. You also hear this known as loan application fee. And then lastly is going to be home inspection, thank you.
Could you give me the price I know you gave me a wide range, gave us a wide range of just a residential home,
Appraisal,
yeah.
Um,
What's the cost of it?
I typically say 550, sometimes it's 500, a few bucks less, sometimes it's 600, especially if it's a unique property. If it's got like 10 acres or, you know, like a new construction with a super weird layout, could be a little bit more. If it's a 2-family, 3-family, 4-family, that's gonna be more. It could be as much as $800. If it's an income property like an investment, they also have to do a rent analysis, so that's gonna be an extra $100. So sometimes you. And my suggestion, just like I said, common sense, read the pre-approval letter, call the loan officer. You want to be hearing from or checking in with the loan officer once a week. You know, if a loan officer has bad news, they're not always willing to give it right away. They're thinking, I'm just gonna tread water until I can figure this out. Well, if you're going to your seller, especially in a listing, you go, oh, they're having problems with financing. It's like 2 days before closing, we just now found out about that. Well, what was going on last week? I don't know, I haven't talked to him since we submitted the offer. So put that on your list, at least once a week. You know, you might annoy the loan officer, I wouldn't worry about that.
It's more appreciative when the loan officer is actually sending you the communication.
We have a routine, each loan officer in our office, we have kind of a weekly update, hey, here's what's going on. So usually you're gonna hear from the loan officer with us.
And sometimes you forget that there's like a whole domino effect. If this loan doesn't close, the
Cool.
seller isn't buying the next
yeah.
one, which affects the next one, which is like, you don't want to be the agent that's sitting there that caused the whole domino cards to go down.
Well, and oftentimes I think this listing agent's calling me for like the 10th time, and I'm thinking to myself, I know so many loan officers, I would do the same thing. Same thing. And just so you know, this goes back to all the checks that Jade's company mails out after closing. The average transaction has about 45 hands on there. So I always remind the buyer, you've got your realtor, your loan officer, or you can, realtor especially, your loan officer, the title company, insurance agent, home inspector. Those are the 5 people they're probably gonna have conversations with. There's 40 other entities behind that we're all dependent on, so.
Yeah.
2 things, and Sean, you can add to this, that I'm asking my buyers to make sure that they know now. When they enter a loan, I want them to know how much their out-of-pocket costs are, which is you can write down payment plus closing costs. And 2, I want them to know what their monthly payment is. They need to answer those 2 questions because often a buyer gets way too deep into points and prepaids and then prorated taxes, bless you, and all these other different items. We don't need to be diving that deep. We need to boil it down to those 2 simple items unless they're more advanced into understanding how loans work. Is there anything else that you'd recommend that they know?
No, that's pretty much it. And having that conversation, you know, if Eric refers me someone, I have a conversation with the buyer and there's some uniqueness to it. Eric's gonna get a call regardless. Hey, buyer looks great, or, you know, a few little things, or hey, we can do this, but we have to close after October 1st. Those, just that open line of communication is good.
And don't forget closing costs. That hasn't been a challenge recently because sellers have not been paying them. So it's almost automatic that a buyer will. And don't forget, a buyer might think up front that they're gonna get the seller to pay closing costs because if one lender told them that, or their parents said, oh, just go ahead and do that. If you're not writing that into the contract and negotiating that up front, good luck figuring it out after the fact. Yeah, it's highly likely you're not going to get it done in today's market. And that could just completely, screw up the deal for a 5-minute conversation. So, thank you. All right. Schedule and, so day 1 through 7, schedule and complete general home inspection. Make sure the property disclosures are sent to the home inspector prior to the inspection. So when we're doing our magic 6, we should be thinking, I'm scheduling the inspection. Hey, Mr. Home Inspector, here's the property disclosure. I just want to make sure that you're aware that there is a damp wall in the basement and the buyer's unaware. So make sure you bring your moisture meter and it's charged and whatever that is, and carbon copy the buyer on there so they see what you're doing. Show your buyers what you're doing. Sean just said there are 45 people touching the transaction. It is unbelievable. The buyers have no idea. I just had a buyer tell me, well, it was that same loan that took forever, and they said, well, it's now the title company's time to shine. And it was GM Title, and they did shine, and they got the deal closed within 24 hours of the lender finally giving the clear to close. But the reality was, they made it sound like that title company did nothing up until this point, and I'm like, you have no idea, you know, the amount of emails and contact and everything that they've done so far. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes to make sure your buyer's aware of that. I also have in here, make sure the buyer is prepared to pay for the home inspection unless the contract states otherwise. Your buyer is 99% of the time expected to show up at the home inspection, and they're also expected to pay for the home inspection at the home inspection. So just re-reference this guide and you can go right in here and go, oh, that's right. Hey, Mr. Buyer, bring your checkbook. Home inspections are anywhere between $400 and $600, unless you want add-ons of radon or mold or fill in the blank. All right. Day 1 through 4, make sure earnest money is received by the appropriate party. We already talked about that quite a bit. It can be, by the way, it doesn't have to be at the title company, it can be at the brokerages. It's rare that we do that anymore in Northeast Ohio. Occasionally you'll see that, and that's okay. That would just be an email to the other broker, not always the agent, but the other broker, find out who needs to be contacted over there. It could be the agent, and just say, can you please send confirmation that the earnest money has been deposited. Remember, there is a difference between collecting a check and depositing it in the account, right? Because an agent might collect the check, throw it at their desk, and be like, oh, I got the earnest money. Go and try and collect that. Good luck. If it's deposited in the broker's trust account, that's where it needs to be. So I would actually put that verbiage in there. Is it deposited in your broker's trust account? We always encourage wire transfer or ACH deposit whenever possible. We already talked about that. Day 2 through 8, immediately following the inspection, negotiate the ROC. What's ROC stand for? Love that everybody knows that. And that is due within how many days after the last inspection? Who knows that one?
No. 4, 3.
Oh,
Three.
yeah.
3 days.
7 days, what you're thinking of is typically 7 days for the inspections. Now, that does not mean a total of 10 days to get the ROC done. It means within 3 days of the last inspection, you can get the ROC negotiated, meaning day 1, the home inspection happens, day 4, you have to have the ROC done by. Day 5 is the home inspection, day 8 is the removal contingency date. Often agents go, well, I have 7 days for the home inspection, I did it day 1, I have 10 days to negotiate. No. And remember, speed is key. I bring the ROC and negotiate it at the home inspection when I'm done. Sometimes the home inspector will say, hey, I'll send you the report later today. Well, guess what, Mr. Buyer, you already know what the home inspector said. There were 2 items that you really cared about. Let's figure this out right now while we're here. Not wait for the inspection and read 40 pages. You already know what those other 40 pages are. We're worried about 2 items. Let's get negotiating. Speed is going to help everyone move things along. All right. Make sure price reductions, closing cost changes are sent to title company and lender. I can't stress this. I know we talked about it before. Title companies won't know to change anything unless that happens. By the way, what else changes with the purchase price? What else changes with a purchase price?
Commission.
Commission, who said that?
Oh.
And where does our commission belong when we send it to the title company? What's that form called? Thank you, exactly. So if we have we already sent in our escrow letter if we did our job correctly. Title company has it. We now sent to the title company and lender the new price change. Well, guess what else we have to change? A new escrow letter. So go back to your notes, change that escrow letter amount and get it over. Day 1 through, nope, we're ahead of it. Day 9 through 16. Go ahead.
No, I was just helping you, 9 through 16.
Thank you. I have 2 different forms. I have one that's filled in, one that's not. I'm balancing them out. Day 9 through 16, follow up on the appraisal results. So I'm checking in with the lender and just saying, hey, I know the appraisal happened. Did we get the results? Who knows what the average timeline from the moment the appraiser knocks on the front door, how long does it take to get the results in your hands?
7 to 10 days.
It's about a week. A week is a good amount because it takes 2 days typically for the appraiser to actually do the actual work they have to once they leave the property. And it takes another 2 days typically for the underwriter to look at it, review it, and another another day in there just for fun. That's 5 business days, so that's a whole week.
Do you recommend an appraisal before the, rock, before you negotiate the rock, or should you do the appraisal?
Great question. Everyone should listen very carefully to how I'm about to respond to this. She asked, do I recommend to my buyers for them to pay for the appraisal before the ROC? Lenders try and push back on this. Always order that appraisal immediately. Especially if it's a lender that is some big bank that could take 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get their appraiser out there. You're buying a house, let's get this figured out. Yes, you might waste $400 or $500. You're also going to possibly waste 2 to 3 weeks of time for a seller if you keep waiting and playing games. And our ROC is not just, hey, day 7, we're all done. It's day 7, the seller gets it maybe, and then they're going, well, hold on, we want our roofer, we want our inspector. And then they come back with a counter offer, and that counter offer is, well, we'll do this, but we won't do that. And now your buyer wants to review and think about it for a couple of days and get different opinions. It can take weeks, so we want to make sure that we're jumping on top of this and negotiating accordingly. Great question. Yes, there's a very few times that I'll think in my mind, you know what, I'll let this ROC go through first, and then I'll order the appraisal, but 99% of the time, I'm forcing it. Lenders push back on this, and it states in our contract, not only do they have to apply for their loan, they also have to order the appraisal. So I force that, especially on the listing side.
Right, because it gives them more, buying, give them more, power, you know, in
Yeah.
negotiating too, as well, if you don't get that appraisal.
Exactly.
And if you haven't figured out what we're gonna do with the rock,
Mhm.
then there's a problem.
Exactly. Day 1 through 30, we're constantly asking for referrals. Often you will notice that a client may tell you, you know what, Eric, it's been so great working with you. We feel like you were probably your worst client ever. We've dragged you around to every house. They don't understand the majority. The reason why we exist is because we have a challenging job.
Yeah.
That is part of what we do. There's an agent out of our office that's really good about making a joke out of it when they're like, "Oh, could you show me it tonight at 8 o'clock? I know it's tough." And they'll say, I can do it if you give me a referral. It'll cost you a referral all the time. So who do you know, look by yourself.
That's a good line.
Often we're looking for Zillow reviews and all of that until we're done with the transaction. There's no need to wait until you're done. Get a Zillow review or any review you want to do. Submit your own form. I don't care what you do. Submit that and get those things filled out now, especially while they're excited. Let's see, day 30 through day 33, really important that you check on the ROC repairs that are completed. So this is done at what time typically? What's that form that we use and that time?
The removal contingency form?
That's the form that it's written on, but when we're going to the property again, and we're doing it right before closing, what's that time?
Final walkthrough?
Final walkthrough.
Hour walkthrough, I worded it wrong, that's why everyone was confused. But that's what we wanna do, bring the ROC with you and confirm it's done. I had a story of an agent who had written down not included hot tub. Well, not included hot tub does not mean removed hot tub by the seller. The seller just said, well, it's there. Buyer went out of town, they couldn't do the walkthrough, that agent should have gone there. And hindsight is 20/20, she should have gone there and done the walkthrough without her. They closed on the property, there was some other challenges on getting loan closed, they got it done, they were celebrating, they get there, hot tub's there. Who owned the responsibility? That agent. They said, fine, I'll get it removed, not a big deal, it'll cost a couple $100. Ubers went out there to go get the hot tub, they said, we can't do it because it's hooked up with electrical. They got the electrician out there, they opened it up, there's a bee's nest in the electrical panel. They then get the exterminator out there, the exterminator gets it out of there, she paid for all of that, and yeah. Luckily, there was a big hole in the deck or something when she was done, right? So you can see being proactive and just checking your boxes before you move. I know it doesn't seem significant, you're worried about the loan closing, you're worried about getting this check to your client for 150 grand. Whatever that is, you have to still check the ROCs, make sure these things are done, because what's the power the seller or the buyer has if those items aren't done? Ask for less or
Back on.
they can just say, I'm not doing this, I'm backing out if you don't abide by what we agreed to. Once you close and that seller gets their $150,000 check, what do you have? Maybe
No
you can get your
leverage.
attorney to call him. Good luck. You know, he's in Mexico now enjoying life. He's no longer responding to your calls. Not always, but you get my point. You have the power to do it then and people are motivated.
The main thing too is when you do have that final walkthrough, ask for the receipts.
Yeah,
Of the work that was completed,
not only receipts, but
that they were done by a licensed contractor, you know, especially if it's something electrical or something like that too.
and not only that it was done by them, but also what? We want to see that
That was paid.
that was paid, because if that contractor wasn't paid, they close. Guess what that contractor has the right to do? They can put a lien on the property. And even though title insurance can possibly protect against that or possibly not, I'm not gonna speak on title insurance's behalf. I will tell you though, you just don't wanna go down that road. How do you make sure you're protected against that? You just ask for a paid receipt. Where do we write that in? The ROC, don't just put seller to fix electrical on page 33 of the home inspection. It doesn't say even what the problem is always, it just says an electrician to evaluate.
Yeah.
Be specific about when these dates are due. Are paid invoices due? Are they due before the walkthrough? Not just before closing. Give them a couple days ahead of time so that you have that in your hands.
Right now, it's like furnace needs to be replaced, the AC, the seller is the owner agent too, so he just like, we're gonna do it, so it's no dates on when it's gotta be, like, I need the receipts now, we're closing at 30th, but he keep on putting it on.
So what I would be doing in that, I would email and then either blind carbon copy or carbon copy my buyer and let them know what we are doing to make sure that they see that we're taking action, because guess who's gonna be at fault or looked like at fault if all he goes, I'm checking, like, you can be doing all the work, but your buyer doesn't see it. I'm sure you're already doing this, but for everyone else, make sure that you're communicating and driving it. We cannot force a seller to install a furnace. Court can't, it's not gonna go to court. You're just gonna have to keep pushing it, saying, where are we at, what's happening? And that's where our magic sits, like, there's a little section at the bottom of ours that we have notes on every transaction. It's like, oh, that furnace, where are we at, where are we at? It's real easy to shoot an email now. Good luck on the day of closing that furnace is not working or the AC is not working. It's a problem. And think ahead too, like, what else is needed while the AC is being done? You know, is gas turned on at the property? If the house is vacant, maybe the furnace can't be turned on and checked, right? Think ahead and go, what are those other items? Day 35, set expectations regarding utilities, keys, and mail is what you're putting in there. Utilities, keys, and mail. Don't forget garage door remotes. They are famously stolen by the seller by accident because they're driving out the garage, they close the garage door, and they forget that, you know, it's a force of habit. They just hit it and leave. Now you're running around trying to program garage door remotes or whatever you're trying to do to get the garage door remotes that are in the contract. I also, in the contract, it leaves a little space. I fill in two remotes or 5 remotes or whatever it is. I don't just write in whatever. And I review that with my sellers too. When we're getting an offer in, I'm going, hey, you have to get 3 remotes or all remotes. So all is a vague term. It could be 0, right? The seller is 0. It's something to protect your buyer. Set expectations. Yep. If it's a cash deal, make sure that the buyer is reminded about putting homeowners insurance in place. Why don't they have to worry about that with lending?
Already included.
Yeah, the lender is including in the escrow payment typically if there is escrow. Either way, that lender is not going to give you a couple $100,000 on a house that's not insured. So the lender is always confirming that. If it's cash though, I've watched cash investors, especially if they own 50 homes, they let one slip. So make sure you're reminding them, get your homeowner's insurance, put that in an email. So we also, Taylor added in here, this conversation should happen once the offer is accepted and at least 1 week prior to title transfer. Make sure all parties are scheduled to sign. Request your client's final HUD settlement statement, ALTA statement, I don't care what you call it. A settlement statement is a general term that will work with the title company. And verify it's correct. Verify its accuracy prior to their signing appointment. Now, worst case scenario, if you're up against the wall, and remember, it's not always the title company's fault if they can't get the ALTA statement prior to signing, because sometimes the lenders aren't communicating with them until the very last second, the very last moment. So you might be getting it the moment that your client is signing. understand that HUDs and ALTAs, if there are mistakes, can be modified after signing. There are mistakes, it's okay. If it's $75, sign the thing and let's move on. The title company will refund whatever is needed. There's a form that they actually have your client sign stating that. If it's $25,000, probably want to get that redraft. So, and that can be done quickly, but be aware and prep your client too. I will tell them, hey, we have an 8 o'clock closing. Like, there's a problem on that ALTA statement. I don't have it till 6 o'clock. There's nothing we can do. We're gonna have to reschedule for tomorrow. That's gonna be our plan. But typically you don't have to go down that road.
Eric, I'm a stickler for abbreviations. So
Yeah.
you say HUD and Alta, what are the abbreviations for that? I mean, what's
So
the,
the HUD statement was Housing and Urban Development. That's
yes,
the federal government.
right.
ALTA. I will Google it.
Do you know, Jay, what Alta stands for?
I do not.
I'm sorry,
I would say American Land,
because I know like these terms are thrown out all the time, CD, this and that. And some title companies call them something a little bit different, you know, and I always feel a little ignorant when I'm in my communications, like I would like to see my client's
Settlement
Disclosure.
statement.
settlement statement,
yeah, that's what we call that.
settlement statement.
Yeah. And then the CD is closing disclosure, which has to do specifically with the buyer lenders.
It's funny because the reason they came up with the ALTA is to make it easier for a buyer to understand. And I don't even know
What it's for, right?
Um,
All right, so
It is easier to. Aluminum lithium test article. I don't think that's it.
okay, so
Hold on,
anyway, I can
America.
just refer to it as the settlement statement, closing disclosure statement.
I think Sean had it close, American Land Title Association.
I was
That's
just
what
saying,
that's
you should
it
say
for.
Land Title
Okay.
Association?
That's what I'm seeing here. According
Let
to
me just stick with
Investopedia.
settlement statement.
Yeah.
It's easier. I always just call it the HUD.
See, my problem is being Italian, I just think of the Alta House down in Blue Italy.
Oh. There you go. So this was for a 37-day filing timeline, which is about what we typically see, depending on the type of loan. That can drastically vary depending on the lender, the loan type, if it's cash, not cash. But this gives you a good outline of what to expect. Any questions we have on any?